I was sitting in my boss's office while he explained how I'd committed fraud. Thousands of dollars. My name, my access card, my career hanging by a thread. And the worst part wasn't that I was about to lose everything. It was that the person who did this was standing outside my office, smiling, waiting for me to be fired. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, if you've ever had someone smile while trying to destroy your career, then hit like, subscribe, and get comfortable, because this story proves that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's precise. March 2021. Lockdowns everywhere. Half-empty offices. Everyone stressed, tired, and one bad week away from burning out. I was working as a manager in a mid-sized company, not glamorous, not famous, but stable. The kind of job you build your life around. I took it seriously, probably more seriously than most. I believed that if you showed up, did the work, and treated people fairly, things would usually work out. My job wasn't about control. It was about keeping the team functional, making sure projects didn't fall apart, making sure clients didn't feel ignored, making sure problems were handled before they turned into disasters. Most days, that meant absorbing pressure from above so my team didn't feel crushed by it. That's when she joined my team. I'll call her Evil. She was in her mid-20s, fresh out of college, and absolutely overflowing with confidence. The first time I met her, she talked nonstop. Big ideas, big goals, big future plans. She spoke like someone who already believed she was destined for a much higher position than the one she'd just been hired for. On paper, she looked perfect, educated, ambitious, charismatic, the kind of hire companies love to brag about. And at first, I thought maybe her energy would be a good thing. New blood, fresh perspective. But within a few weeks, cracks started showing. Clients began complaining quietly at first. Emails not returned. Follow-ups delayed. Small deadlines missed. Nothing dramatic enough to raise alarms, just enough to be annoying. When I asked her about it, she always had an answer ready. The client was unreasonable. The inbox must have glitched. She'd already sent that email. She was just overwhelmed. Every explanation sounded reasonable on its own. But together, they formed a pattern. The biggest red flag wasn't the mistakes. It was that nothing was ever her fault, ever. Every problem came with a story where she was the victim of circumstances, bad clients, or bad luck. And every time, she looked me straight in the eye and said the same thing. I've got it under control. She didn't. Projects that should have been simple turned messy. Clients escalated issues that never should have reached that point. And every time I traced the problem back, it landed at her desk. Still, I didn't jump to punishment. I'd seen good employees struggle before. Pressure does strange things to people. Sometimes they just need guidance. So after one monthly review, I asked her to stay behind. I was direct but fair. I explained that if she was overwhelmed, she needed to say so. That hiding problems only made things worse. That my job wasn't to catch her out, it was to keep the team running. I told her I wasn't putting her on any formal performance plan. I just wanted visibility. My solution was simple. A 10-minute check-in every Monday morning. Goals for the week. Any issues. Any support needed. Short, professional, no micromanaging. She nodded, smiled, said she understood. But something in her expression changed. It wasn't anger. It was worse. It was resentment. From that day on, she became colder. Still polite. Still smiling. But the warmth was gone. She stopped engaging beyond what was necessary. Her answers became shorter. Her eyes avoided mine. At the time, I assumed she was embarrassed or annoyed. I had no idea that in her mind, I'd just made myself an enemy. What I didn't know was that while I thought I was helping her improve, she was already planning how to remove me completely. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. People get defensive when they feel watched. Nobody enjoys accountability, especially someone who believes they're smarter than everyone else in the room. So when her attitude shifted, when the smiles became thinner and the conversations shorter, I convinced myself it would pass. I focused on my own work, on keeping the rest of the team on track, and on protecting our clients from any more unnecessary chaos. But the complaints didn't stop. In fact, they became quieter and more dangerous. Clients stopped complaining directly and started escalating to upper management instead. That's always the worst sign. When people stop arguing with you and go over your head, it means trust is already broken. Every escalation landed on my desk. Every explanation led back to her. And every time I tried to address it, she insisted everything was fine and that she just needed a little more autonomy. I remember one Monday morning check-in very clearly. She sat across from me, arms crossed, jaw tight, nodding along while I spoke. When I asked if she needed help managing her workload, she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said, "I don't need help. I need space." It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. In that moment, I realized she didn't see me as a manager trying to support her. She saw me as an obstacle. Still, I kept things professional. I documented everything: emails, deadlines, missed follow-ups. Not because I planned to use it against her, but because experience had taught me one hard lesson. If something goes wrong, the person without documentation becomes the easiest target. I had no idea how true that would become. Around that time, my role required me to occasionally use a company purchasing card. It wasn't issued in my name, but I was authorized to access it. Office supplies, small team expenses, client-related purchases under a certain limit. Nothing fancy. The card lived in a locked drawer in a shared office I used with another manager. Controlled access. Clear rules. I'd used it dozens of times without incident. Then one afternoon, I got a call from the accounts department. They sounded confused, not angry. They asked if I could explain a few charges that didn't match typical business use. A Photoshop subscription, a couple of Uber Eats orders, an HBO subscription. At first, I genuinely thought they had the wrong person. I laughed a little and told them it definitely wasn't me. I suggested they check with the other manager who had access to the card. They did. He denied it too. That weekend felt wrong. I couldn't explain why, but there was a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. I kept replaying the conversation with accounts in my head, wondering if I'd forgotten something obvious. Monday morning, I walked into the office already tense. By midday, I was called into the director's office. The tone was completely different this time. No casual conversation. No friendly smiles. Just a closed door and a serious look. Accounts had done some digging. They'd contacted the vendors. The purchases weren't random. They were tied to accounts registered under my name. Email addresses using my name. Login details that pointed straight at me. I felt physically sick. My ears started ringing as they talked. I barely heard half of it. All I could think about was how impossible this sounded. I denied it immediately, but doubt crept in fast. What if I'd saved the card details somewhere? What if my browser autofilled something? What if my wife had accidentally used it? I hated myself for even thinking that way, but fear does that to you. It makes you question your own reality. The director reminded me about trust, about the agreement I'd signed, about how access to company funds was a privilege. He didn't accuse me outright, but he didn't defend me either. I left that office with my job still intact, but only just. It felt like standing on ice that had already started to crack. When I stepped back into the hallway, my hands were shaking. That's when I saw her. She was standing outside my office door, holding a cup of tea, smiling like it was any other morning. She said she'd been waiting for our weekly check-in. I told her something had come up and that we'd reschedule. She tilted her head slightly and asked very casually, "Oh, will you be in tomorrow?" The question didn't make sense at the time. I answered yes, confused, and asked why. She smiled, took a slow sip of her tea, and said, "Oh, no reason." As she walked away, something in my gut dropped. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. Her question echoed in my head. The timing, the confidence, the way she looked completely unconcerned while my career was hanging by a thread. I started making calls the moment I got a break. Adobe, Uber, HBO, anyone who would talk to me. Piece by piece, a picture started forming. Someone had been using my name deliberately, carefully, not sloppy, strategic. Then Uber Eats told me where one of the orders had been delivered. It was in our city, not across the country, not overseas, local. That's when fear turned into suspicion, and suspicion turned into anger. I pulled up her employee profile, checked the address she had on file, opened Google Maps, dropped a pin. Then I entered the delivery address Uber had given me. It was on the corner of her block. My heart was pounding now. Not panic, rage, cold, focused rage. Someone hadn't just stolen money. They'd tried to erase me. And suddenly, everything made sense. That night I contacted IT, and what we found on her work laptop would change everything. The moment IT unlocked her work laptop, the last remaining doubt inside me disappeared. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an accident. This was a plan. Right there, saved inside her browser, was an email account using my name. Not similar. Not close. My actual name formatted exactly the way company emails were structured. The password was saved. The login history showed repeated access during work hours. Every abnormal purchase lined up perfectly with her activity. Photoshop, Uber, Eats, streaming subscriptions. All of it traced back to that single fake account, quietly living on her machine like a loaded weapon she assumed no one would ever find. I remember standing there with the IT guy, staring at the screen, feeling something strange settle over me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. The kind that strips away panic and replaces it with purpose. I asked I to document everything. Screenshots, timestamps, IP addresses, device IDs. I wanted this so clean that no one could spin it. No emotional language. No accusations. Just facts stacked on top of facts. What made it worse was realizing how careful she'd tried to be. The IP address pointed to the office network, which would have led straight back to me. The food deliveries weren't sent directly to her door, but close enough to retrieve easily without drawing attention. The email account mimicked company formatting. She hadn't acted out of impulse. She'd thought this through. She believed she was smarter than everyone else in the room, and for a brief moment, she almost was. That night, I called my boss. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rant. I simply walked him through what we'd found while I stayed on the line to confirm every detail. There was a long silence when I finished. Then he said quietly, "I'll handle this first thing tomorrow." I slept maybe 2 hours that night. Not because I was worried anymore, but because adrenaline doesn't disappear just because the truth shows up. My body was still catching up to my brain. The next morning, the office felt different, heavy, like something was about to snap. She arrived right on time, cheerful as ever. She even greeted me. No hesitation. No fear. That confidence told me she still believed her plan was intact. That belief was the last thing she had. Around mid-morning, my boss asked her to step into his office. The timing wasn't subtle. Glass walls. Open floor. Everyone could see her walk in. She stood up smoothly, adjusted her jacket, and walked in like this was a promotion meeting. The door closed behind her. The conversation didn't last long, 10 minutes at most, but you could feel it from outside. Raised voices, then silence. When the door finally opened, she didn't look like the same person. Her face was pale. Her posture collapsed. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't confident. She looked small. HR followed her out, and she was instructed to collect her belongings immediately. Watching her pack her desk was surreal. Hands shaking, papers dropping, keys clattering onto the floor. No one spoke. No one needed to. This wasn't gossip-worthy drama anymore. This was consequence. When she finally walked past me toward the exit, our eyes met for a split second. There was no anger in her expression, just shock. Like she still couldn't understand how the ground had given way beneath her. After she left, my boss called me in. He apologized. Not the corporate kind, the human kind. He admitted he should have trusted me from the beginning. He told me my name was fully cleared and that the company wouldn't involve the police unless I wanted to pursue it. I declined. Not out of kindness, out of exhaustion. I just wanted it to be over. The days that followed were strange. Her name stopped being mentioned. Her accounts were disabled. Her presence erased from the system. It was like she'd never existed. That silence was louder than any apology she could have given. I stayed on for a few more months, finished strong, and eventually moved on to a better role elsewhere. The boss supported me fully, wrote references, shook my hand, made sure there were no shadows left behind me. I never heard from her again. No apology. No explanation, nothing. And that told me everything I needed to know. She didn't regret trying to destroy me. She regretted that it didn't work. A few days after everything ended, I remembered the Uber Eats orders. The irony was too perfect to ignore. On my way home, I pulled over, opened the app, and ordered Wendy's. Nothing excessive. Just enough. I sent it to her address. Paid with my own card. No note, no message. Just closure. A quiet full stop at the end of a sentence she'd started. Looking back, I don't feel proud of it. But I don't feel guilty either. Revenge doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it's just knowing the truth came out. The right person paid the price, and you got to walk away with your integrity intact. Ambition without ethics isn't drive. It's danger. And sooner or later, it always collapses under its own weight.
If there's one thing I learned, it's this: document everything. Trust your instincts. And never underestimate how far the wrong person will go when they think you're standing between them and what they believe they deserve. After everything was officially over, I thought I would feel normal again. I thought once the threat was gone, once my name was cleared, my body would finally relax. But that's not how it works. When someone tries to destroy your livelihood, the damage doesn't disappear the moment justice is served. It lingers. It shows up in quiet moments. In the way your chest tightens when an unexpected email arrives. In the way your heart skips when a manager asks to have a quick chat. I was safe, but my nervous system hadn't caught up yet. For weeks, I replayed the whole situation in my head. Every conversation. Every smile. Every excuse she ever gave me. I wondered how long she'd been pretending. Whether she'd decided to sabotage me the moment I introduced those Monday check-ins. Or if resentment had been building even earlier. The scariest realization was how normal she'd seemed the entire time. There were no warning labels. No dramatic villain moments. Just a coworker who laughed, chatted, and quietly sharpened a knife behind her back. People at work were careful around me after that. Not cold. Just cautious. Like they'd seen how close I came to falling through the cracks. And didn't want to say the wrong thing. A few colleagues eventually pulled me aside and told me how relieved they were that the truth had come out. One even admitted they'd felt something was off about her but couldn't explain why. That stuck with me. Intuition whispers long before evidence speaks. But most of us are trained to ignore it in professional settings. I also started noticing how the company handled trust after the incident. Policies tightened. Access controls became stricter. Approvals required more documentation. In a strange way, her actions changed the entire workplace. One person's ambition forced everyone else to become more careful, more skeptical. It wasn't dramatic, but it was permanent. And knowing that made her betrayal feel even heavier. This wasn't just about me anymore. She'd poisoned the well. At home, my wife noticed the change in me before I did. I was quieter. More guarded. Less patient with small problems. She reminded me that I'd done nothing wrong. That I'd handled the situation with integrity. But part of me still felt violated. Trust, once broken, doesn't snap back into place. It has to be rebuilt piece by piece. And sometimes you don't even realize you're rebuilding it until years later. I thought about her future more than I expected to. Not out of sympathy, but out of curiosity. How does someone explain that gap on their resume? How do you rebuild credibility after being fired for fraud? Every reference check. Every background conversation. Every awkward pause when someone asks why you left your last job. Those consequences don't explode all at once. They echo. Quietly. Relentlessly. And that, more than anything, felt like justice. What haunted me the most was how close she came to succeeding. If IT hadn't found that saved password. If Uber Eats hadn't logged the delivery address so precisely. If my boss had decided not to dig deeper. My entire career could have ended on a lie. That realization changed how I viewed fairness. We like to believe the truth always wins, but the truth needs help. It needs preparation. Documentation. People willing to slow down and actually look. By the time I decided to leave the company months later, the fear had faded. Replaced by something calmer. Confidence. Not the loud kind. The kind that comes from surviving something you didn't deserve and coming out intact. My boss supported my move completely. Gave me a strong recommendation. Told me he was glad the situation hadn't defined my time there. I appreciated that. I needed that. On my last day, as I packed my desk, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not just from leaving the company, but from leaving that chapter of my life behind. I walked out of the building knowing that someone had tried to erase me and failed. Knowing that I'd stayed professional when it would have been easier to explode. Knowing that I didn't need to become cruel to survive someone else's cruelty. Sometimes revenge isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about not losing who you are when someone else tries to take everything from you. By the time I fully settled into my new job, months had passed since everything happened. The distance gave me clarity. What once felt like a near miss catastrophe slowly turned into a lesson I carried quietly with me. I trusted my instincts more. I documented everything. I paid closer attention to how people reacted when held accountable. Not everyone who smiles is on your side. And not everyone who challenges you is your enemy. That line became clearer after everything I'd been through. I sometimes wondered if she ever truly understood what went wrong. People like her rarely see themselves as the villain. In her mind, she probably still believes she was unlucky. That she almost won, that one small mistake ruined an otherwise perfect plan. But the truth is simpler. You can't build a future on deception and expect it to hold. Eventually, the weight of your own choices cracks the foundation. What stayed with me the most wasn't the fear or even the anger. It was the realization of how quiet justice can be. There was no dramatic confrontation. No shouting match. No public shaming. Just evidence, consequences. And a door closing behind someone who thought she was untouchable. That kind of justice doesn't go viral. But it lasts. Every now and then, I think about that moment outside my office. When she asked if I'd be in the next day. At the time, it felt confusing. Now it feels symbolic. She thought she'd written the ending already. She thought the story was over. She was wrong. The truth has a way of rewriting endings. Especially when someone underestimates how carefully other people are watching. I don't tell this story often. Not because I'm ashamed of it, but because it reminds me how fragile trust really is. Careers, reputations, entire lives can balance on a single accusation. That's why I share it now. Not to brag, not to gloat, but to remind anyone listening that staying calm, staying honest, and staying prepared matters more than reacting emotionally in the moment. If you're ever in a situation where something feels off, listen to that feeling. Document everything. Ask questions. And don't let someone else's confidence convince you that you're powerless. People who rely on manipulation usually collapse the moment their lies are exposed to light. So yes, revenge and justice can be the same thing. Not when it's fueled by rage, but when it's grounded in truth. I didn't need to ruin her life. I just let her own choices speak for themselves. And that, in the end, was enough. If this story hit close to home, take a second to hit the like button. Subscribe for more real, emotionally charged stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone's plan completely backfire on them? Because sometimes the most satisfying endings are the ones written by karma itself.